The next part of our first unit in AP Biology is about water. You know, of course, that water is essential to life. Water is more important than food. You can live a whole lot longer without food than you can without water. Most cells are surrounded by water. Cells themselves are, here it says, not 70 to 95% water. And so it is definitely a very important thing. Having water present is what makes Earth habitable. In the search for extraterrestrial life, one of the first things that scientists look for as they look at other planets is the presence of water, because the life as we know it is dependent upon water, and if water is not present, then life can't be present either, at least as we know it. So it's very, very important. The habitat of a polar bear, of course, is very dependent on the chemistry of water. The things that are important here, the fact that the water temperature, although it's very cold, usually where the polar bear lives, it moderates. It's not as cold as the environment that surrounds it. So it helps moderate. It doesn't change temperature very easily because of the nature. Another thing that's important to the polar bear's environment is the ice flows that they are dependent upon. The fact that ice floats, is less dense than liquid water, and it floats on the surface. That's important for a number of different reasons. For one thing, it gives the polar bear a stage from which to hunt. For another reason, it helps keep the fish alive that live in the water that the polar bear depends on, the fish and seals and other organisms that the polar bear depends upon for food. So the properties of water are very, very important, not only just water itself, but also the properties, the emergent properties that you see in water and bodies of water. One of the most important things about water that makes it so universal here is the fact that there are polar covalent bonds in the water molecules, within the water molecule. Okay, remember, polar means that the opposite ends of the molecule have opposite charges. It's due to an unequal sharing of electrons between the components of the molecule. The oxygen, of course, is more electronegative and also more massive than the hydrogen atoms. I'm sorry, the oxygen atom. And so it has a stronger attraction for those electrons, which end up spending more of their time around the oxygen part of the molecule than it does around the hydrogen part of the molecule. So therefore, there's a concentration of negative charges relative at the oxygen end relative to the hydrogen ends, and that makes the bond between the atoms in the molecule polar, and that lends the water the ability to form hydrogen bonds not only with other water molecules, but with other substances as well, other polar substances or charged substances. There are 4 emergent properties of water that contribute to Earth's sustainability or suitability for life. Okay, and these are the cohesive behavior of water because of the hydrogen bonding, the ability to moderate temperature, having to do with the specific heat capacity of water, the expansion of water upon freezing, and water's versatility as a solvent. These are the 4 properties of water that make it extremely important and why it is essential to life. So let's talk about first cohesion. Of course, cohesion is due to the hydrogen bonding of the water molecules. Okay, cohesion is the attraction of like substances for each other, and that's what helps water behave in lots of the ways that we see water behave. For instance, the transport of water in plants goes against gravity, and that's because of the cohesive nature of water as well as the adhesive nature of water with the plant cell walls. So the adhesion, remember, is an attraction between different substances, like the water and the plant cell walls, and that allows the water molecules to basically be pushed up or pulled up through the plant. Surface tension is another important thing, and that's a measure of how hard it is to break the surface of a liquid, and that's also related to cohesion. And you've seen, all kinds of things about surface tension, how the water beads up when rain falls on your newly waxed car, or how you can overfill a glass of water and have it hump up over the top of the glass, and so forth. The moderation of temperature is another thing that's essential to life on Earth. The water can absorb or release heat without changing its own temperature very much. And that's because of its a high specific heat capacity. And that can also be traced to the hydrogen bonding. So hydrogen bonding is an extremely important feature that water molecules have. What this does is it helps minimize the temperature fluctuations in the water to within the limits that permit life. Life as we know it is not, there's not very much life at freezing temperatures or temperatures below freezing of temperature of water, and there's not very much life at temperatures above boiling, the boiling point of water. Is there some? Probably, but most life is within those limits, and individual species, individual organisms have limits even smaller than that. But because of the environment they live in, the water usually stays within a range that is amenable to life in that particular set of populations. As the liquid evaporates, it cools. It causes evaporative cooling, and that also helps stabilize the temperatures, not only in the bodies of water, but also in the organisms that live there. And so the evaporative cooling is an important concept. Of course, we depend on evaporative cooling to help cool our bodies when it's hot by means of sweat. The floating of ice on liquid water is really important because what happens when water freezes, and you probably learned some of this in chemistry, is that the hydrogen bonds in the ice are more orderly, and that makes the ice less dense. It doesn't trap air in between the molecules, but it creates more space between the molecules, a more regimented space between the molecules, and they don't move around as much. Water reaches its greatest density at 4 degrees Celsius, and once it gets to a lower temperature than 4 degrees Celsius, the density decreases, making the ice itself less dense than water and allowing it to float on the surface. If ice sank, then what would happen is the bodies of water would eventually freeze solid, and that would make life impossible. As it is, since ice floats on the surface of water, you can maintain the temperature of water below the surface of the ice at a higher temperature, making it possible for life underneath the ice to continue. Another thing that's really important about water is its ability to be a solvent for so many different things. Okay, you know, of course, a lot of things about solutions, okay, and solvents and solutes. Aqueous solutions, of course, are the ones we're going to be most concerned with in biology. That's one where water is a solvent. And again, the polarity and hydrogen bonding are the things that allow water its versatility as a solvent. When you have an ionic compound that dissolves in water, then each of those ions is surrounded by a sphere of water molecules called a hydration shell. You learned about this in chemistry as well. And water can easily dissolve compounds made of polar molecules of various kinds, even ones that are not ionic. Okay, and large polar molecules can even dissolve in water if they have ionic and polar regions. So it's very important to understand that water's versatility as a solvent is one of its primary benefits. Acids and bases are special kinds of solutions that definitely have an effect on living organisms, okay? And so you know that water can dissociate into hydronium or hydrogen ions and hydroxide ions, okay? And it most often does this when in various kinds of solutions. When you have a change in the concentration of hydrogen ions or hydroxide ions, that can drastically affect the chemistry of a cell. You learned in chemistry a lot of things about concentrations of acids and bases and how they affect each other. And the effect that they have on living cells is really important because, again, living cells or living organisms have a range of pHs at which they can comfortably exist. Major changes outside that range can be harmful or even deadly to the cell or the organism. This brings up the point of buffers. In biology, buffers are really, really important, okay? The internal pH of most living cells has to remain close to pH 7. It's not usually exactly 7, but it's fairly close, okay? And so buffers are necessary to help minimize those changes in the concentrations of those ions. When you have various kind of chemical reactions going on in cells, some of the products are going to have a more acidic or a more basic nature. And the presence of buffers allow those chemical reactions to take place without harming the cell because they can minimize those changes. Most buffers are an acid-base pair that reversibly combines with hydrogen ions. And so you have various things going on inside the cell to help moderate those changes and prevent them from becoming harmful for the organism. This concludes the notes on water. And again, make sure that you've read and thoroughly understand the chapter. And if you have any questions, let me know.